Hello and welcome to our daily sketching routine. It is Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025, and today's topic will be sketching basic forms, which I feel like I might have done a video like this, but we'll see. But yeah, that's the idea, is to stick with the basics. But before we begin, welcome back if you're returning, and welcome if you're new to the channel. I sketch and post every day, and I use a timer to stay focused and to build a habit. The topic is sketching basic forms, and I'm going to be using these Sharpies because I have a set of multicolor. Part of it is I want to see which ones are working and what they look like on this paper, so it's kind of an experiment for color. I might do a video tomorrow about like the idea of the joy of sketching. I kind of wanted to call this one that, but I'll stick with basic forms for now, because part of the joy of it is sort of wanting to play around with markers and colors, but I feel like basic forms is sort of like that too. So for example, sometimes the color will make you want to draw or sketch certain things. So for example, like circles for a tree, and you can kind of play around with different mark making, different types of trees, different like line thicknesses. So make the far away ones smaller. You can stipple. So for the next at least a couple of videos, I just wanted to get into the idea of sketching for fun and also using like the basics of drawing, because it is a kind of language, because this looks like something, this represents something to people. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of random marks, which is okay too. That's like an abstract thing. So this has to do with like mark making. But notice that I can start to make it look like something, like shadow and leaves and stuff like that. And so that's kind of where the basic forms comes in. It's like the light and the shadow, but like it starts with a shape. Just kind of pick different colors just to see. Now that I have this, I can just get the shape of it, and even the way you hold the tool, the pen, I'm just going to copy the shape. And not even really worry about the forms just yet. So to me, like, that's a shape. It can start as a doodle, and it plays into the idea of the joy of sketching, because for me anyway, since I've been sketching, like, this is the most consistent I've ever done it. I usually just, like, in the past I would do it because of kind of like motivated to do it for some reason, for one reason or another. Nowadays I'm just finding the joy of it, like the enjoyment of it, or like the fun of it. And so for me, the fun of it is this kind of thing. So I did the shape, so I started kind of like this, and it's like a warm-up. So it's kind of good to have like these stages, I think, and not feel like, oh, I immediately have to make something, or like have this be part of the process. So a lot of this is just mark making, lines, and then like shapes think about the forms a little bit more. And again, I'm just gonna kind of stick with the same colors kind of, and that's part of like the enjoyment part, is just playing around with color. So to make it into like more of a form, let's start to sculpt it. So one thing, for example, like the white of the paper is a value. I can start to like use the dark. So I noticed that this was the dark color. You can begin to sculpt it. Now you can look at a picture. I'm just kind of making stuff up here, but I think like that's part of the enjoyment too, is just to be able to make up some stuff. But sometimes looking at pictures is the enjoyment. So I'm just going to draw draw the shadow side of these trees or these objects or these tree looking things. But then also kind of keep in mind the perspective that I've kind of set up. So like in the back, the shadows could be a little bit smaller. And kind of treating it the same way, where I'm just kind of being pretty loose and random about it. So this is like mapping out shadows. Now it's starting to be something, starting to be like a composition. But yeah, like, so I was doing those intermediate level videos, which was really helpful for me. So yeah, I was doing that for a few days, and composition was one of the topics. And like, this is part of figuring that out, is that's what a sketchbook is good for, to have fun. So I'm just gonna pick kind of a different color. So that's also another thing, just not just sketching, but also to kind of get a hands-on experience on like color usage rather than the theory of it, to see what effect it actually has, so that when you're looking at something and you're drawing it, you can know, like with your own like hands and eyes and experience, that like that has some purple in it, like that kind of thing. So I'm just shading in the areas that I said was like a shadow. Now the white of the paper is also a value, so notice that it looks kind of like snow. And yeah, I mean, like right now it's like it's abstract, but I just feel like sometimes, because I had been doing pretty like analytical drawing, like perspective and stuff, and then I think sometimes it's good to, once you do that for a while, to switch to something a little bit more abstract maybe, and then turn it into something if you want. But basically to kind of take the pressure off of trying to draw something, basically just have fun making marks. So that's 10 minutes. So let's say you get kind of this far. You could have used a pen. I mean, that's usually what I do, but I'm kind of going through like the different colors. So these are like the greenish, and then I used this as like the kind of a dark, but then I could go back over it with green. Once I get this far, I'm gonna look up something. Alright, so I had this, and I looked up landscape, but before I even kind of go into like that, I'm gonna look at this and sort of think to myself, what can I do with what I see? I mean, it's an abstract drawing, so there's that. But let's say I wanted to turn it into something. So one thing could be, I had already, oh yeah, I had like the light color here. So I know that like, it's not really snow. So I'm going to go ahead and just lay down some like color or like tone. And start to make it look like something, and you'll notice it starts to look like some trees, basically. I guess that's what I was going for. So then the next thing would be, I just found a landscape with some trees. You could have started the other way, like look at a picture and maybe simplify, like maybe we could do that in another video. But as I'm looking at it, I'm gonna look at like the values, and the colors don't even really have to, you could be inspired by it, like, but they don't really have to match. But like, I'm just gonna be inspired by it. So for example, there's some trees that have yellow, so I'm just gonna, but again, this is a different drawing. So I'm just being inspired by the color scheme. And I'm just gonna place it wherever it seems interesting. And still be kind of abstract about it, if you will. So I know it's got some yellows. So you can tell it, like you can see it's starting to look a little bit more like a forest. A lot of times landscapes are going to have some mountains, which I like because I'm not around mountains, so I like to draw them. I'm going to use something light. I kind of started with like a middle, I guess. So, but for this, I'll just use something kind of light. So this is a kind of a good way to play around with composition. Again, you can leave it open like that. But the paper is it's also a color. So I like to play around with landscapes because they can kind of look like they look good as long as like the colors and stuff. You're not trying to draw people. But yeah, I think sometimes if you are constantly trying to draw something like specific, it can burn you out because ideas are sort of, they kind of come from all over the place. So the next thing I noticed is that, one, I used this as like the dark color. There might be a little bit of this purple like in like a reference photo or something, but I'm gonna go over it with green because it's mostly green. So really I'm just gonna stick with, so like the sketch is the purple. I had already put that, made those marks. So I'm just going to go over the same marks, and that way I can preserve the shapes that I had already created, because those shapes, I like those because they were spontaneous shapes. They're free shapes. So I'm just going to keep them and use them without trying to, I would have just kept sketching until I saw something kind of interesting, basically. But now that I kind of have like the forms, since I called it sketching basic forms, and I guess I kind of stuck with trees. I don't know. I might change the title, by the way. I'm not sure what I would call it. Having fun sketching trees, making up a forest. So I just went over one, made it a little bit darker, but like made it more green looking. So that's one thing. And the picture I have has like water, but like I could use the white of the paper. And part of that is just because of the technique. Since I'm using markers and stuff, I can just use this. So that's like a pretty good dark color. So basically start with like the purple or whatever color, and it looks like there's dark areas along here, and then reflection I'll just leave as the white of the paper. So this was how I was getting like the dark color, and I'm just gonna stick with like the shape, and that way you can kind of get more color harmony. But yeah, I mean, just experiment with it, and paint works like this. Like you mix colors around. And then there's some kind of orange color right here. Some orange around here. That's just to get started. So yeah, sometimes you can have fun. Maybe I'll call this the joy of sketching. But I'll keep it going a little bit longer. Yeah, I might switch it to be like the joy of sketching. Joy of sketch. Maybe that's what today was really about. So now that these are the basic colors, and honestly, you should be able to get everything with just these colors. So I'm going to keep some of the white of the paper and not draw over all of it. Part of this is to play around with reflections. And yeah, this isn't from reference, it was random from imagination, but using the kind of reference for ideas. So it might just be silent if you want to watch the sketching. So for these like kind of like back areas, the detail, you can start to have a little bit more detail like this, but I would be pretty definite about it. And this one is a little bit more like painting, in the sense that just put down the paint stroke, like the brush. Again, it's an experiment, just to see. And sometimes things like this, well, first of all, it helps you to get your sketching done, if that's important. Like if that helps you out. But then the other thing is, you might not see the value of it until later. So I'm going to do this. It's kind of like stippling for things that I see, because I can see like smaller shapes. But I'm not going to really try to draw it, because really the drawing is that, like these bigger shapes, like that's actually like the drawing. And this is like detail, in other words. So I'm going to kind of stipple it in rather than trying to draw it in. So for example, the shadows are more like green than purple, but like the purple does help. Makes it look more interesting and also darker. But I'm just gonna use the reference photo and also like what I sketched to merge like the dark shapes and make them look a little bit more like trees. But notice that I'm not trying to draw them again. Like they've already been drawn sort of spontaneously, which kind of lends itself to landscapes, because nature is kind of like, there's an order to it, but it's not mechanical, so there's more spontaneity. So I'm sticking with the shapes, and I'm like squinting a little bit to kind of see if it reads as like a forest, sort of the same with the reference picture. Kind of squinting at it. So the reference picture is really just kind of helping me with the idea of what makes it look like a landscape, but the sketch came from imagination. So yeah, I'm just kind of squinting at it to see if it reads. And then you'll get these kind of shapes. That's basically it for today. It's not a bad sketch, and you could add more detail if you want, or just use it as a kind of study for some other, like a painting or something. But that'll be it for today. I want to thank you for joining me for our daily sketching routine, and if you enjoy these videos, please support the channel, and until next time, keep on sketching.